See, there's something within us that wants to leave a legacy. But here's the thing you need to know is if God asks you to do something, don't look at the size of the job, look at the size of your God who asked you to do it. See, he laid down his life for you, so that tells me that you are not worthless, you are worthy. And this is what he wants to rewrite into your story. That reality impacts everything.
Hey small groups, it is so good to have you guys with us once again. Week 4 of Mistaken Identity. I hope that this has been a really good series for you as you've been processing these truths about your identity in Christ. Let's just dive right into this week's subject, which is really about it's about evaluating your output. And I call it evaluating output in the kind of the two opposing sides, fruit versus flesh. The main point, let me give it to you once again, is this. The output of a kingdom identity will only be fully displayed as you bury your old traits and foster the new traits within you. Let me say it again. The output of a kingdom identity will only be fully displayed as you bury your old traits and foster the new traits. The reason why I said the output of a kingdom identity, or this is the evaluating your output, is because this is one of those areas that you just can't fake it. You know, up till now, we've talked about things like your inner image, or royalty, faith versus fear. Those are elements that you, quite frankly, could kind of fly under the radar and people wouldn't notice. But when it comes to these things that we're talking about today, flesh, or the fruit of the Spirit versus flesh, this stuff you just can't fly under the radar. Your spouse, your kids, your friends, they can see it. They see this one. They see if you are demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit or if you're walking in the flesh. And so we want to obviously be talking about how and what can we do to produce the fruit of the Spirit within us. Galatians chapter 5 is where we looked this week. It says this in verse 17, "For the flesh desires what's contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what's contrary to the flesh. They fight with one another." Verse 22, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control." You kind of know the list. Let me kind of remind us, these are the 5 keys to producing fruit, not flesh. So kind of an identity axiom, or once again, the axiom, these rules in terms of how to produce fruit and not the flesh. First identity axiom is this: to the extent that I explore the Spirit will be the extent that I can walk in the Spirit. And here's where I get this. In one of these first verses here, Galatians 5:16, he says this: "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you'll not gratify the desires of the flesh." And we looked at this Greek word, which is, it's peripateo, and it has this idea of walking around, like exploring. And in a practical sense, this is about exploring your life with the Spirit of God working within you and getting used to what the Spirit of God sounds like, and when He gives you prompts within your heart or within your mind to respond to those. This is about actively listening to the Spirit and trying new things when you sense that He's calling you to something. Like for myself this morning, I woke up and for whatever reason, I just kind of had a bad attitude. I popped out of bed and I thought, oh, today's going to stink. I don't know why I thought that. I just did. I was tired, really. And immediately the Spirit of God within me put a verse in my mind and in my heart, just brought it right to the surface. This is the day the Lord has made. Rejoice and be glad in it. And like that popped in my head. And here's what I've done is I've explored the Spirit enough to go, oh, that's not an accident. And so then I chose to respond to the Spirit's prompting within me and said, okay, rejoice in the Lord. Be grateful for today. So I just started giving Him thanks for all the things I believe that the Lord can do and within this day, and that He's already provided for me. The opportunity to love my wife, the opportunity to parent my kids, the opportunity to be warm and have a cup of coffee. I mean, just being grateful for some of those things. This is the day the Lord has made. And so it's exploring the Spirit and learning to respond to Him. And so I also talked about this. For me, I started learning to explore when this is early on. It was the gut check moments within me. It's when the Spirit of God actually gives me a gut check, and then I respond and say, what are you up to here? And how do you want me to respond? How does your Spirit want to respond within me versus my flesh? Second identity axiom was this: I must have the conviction that I don't get to do whatever I want. I have to have the conviction that I don't get to do whatever I want. Check it out, the next verse. Verse 17, for the flesh desires what's contrary to the spirit, and the spirit what's contrary to the flesh. They're in conflict with each other so that you are not to do whatever you want. I mean, it's just right there. And here's what's hard is that so many of us have had drilled into our heads, like our whole lives, this idea that, and I say it to my kids as well, when you move out, you can do whatever you want. When you're 18, move on out, do whatever you want. And so we have this idea like, listen, if I'm an adult, if I've moved out, I can do whatever I want. And really, that's kind of the furthest thing from the truth. The reality is, I don't get to do whatever I want. If I want to walk in the freedom that God has for me and produce the fruit that He wants to produce in me, I don't get to do whatever I want. I will do whatever He wants. And so it's just something, I've got to have that conviction that I don't get to do whatever I want. I do what He wants to do within me. Third, identity axiom is this: take an honest assessment of what I'm currently producing to reveal my next step. Take an honest assessment of what I'm currently producing. Like, what is really coming out of us? What are we actually producing on a daily basis? And in the next verses, he just kind of says, listen, here's the acts of the flesh. And he says they're obvious, but sometimes I think we get so used to them that we just say, oh, it's not a big deal. But he says, no, this is the flesh at work within you. Sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft. Now, up till that point, probably most of you are like, check, 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 check. Good. Not participating in any witchcraft recently. But then he gets to this, hatred. You know, it's like something so simplistic where we hear people all the time going, oh, I just hate my spouse, or not my spouse, sorry. I hate my ex, or I hate my boss, or or some people have hatred toward a sibling or to a bully at work even, or something like that. And they have this hatred in their heart. He says, watch out, that's the flesh. Discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissension, factions. Are you aware how easy it is to cause factions on like social media or in conversations in those settings? Envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. And then he says, but here's what the Spirit of God produces: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. It's time that you really take an honest evaluation and say, all right, what am I really producing? Because it will reveal your next step. Likely, you're going to recognize, man, there's some places where the flesh is ruling and the Spirit's not. And so I need to take a next step. The fourth identity axiom is this: I remind myself what is alive and what is dead. Galatians chapter 5, verse 24, the next verse, he says those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. It's just such a really profound and blunt statement. The flesh is dead. It's been crucified with Christ. And sometimes I think it's really important that you actually remind your mind and your heart that the flesh is dead. Even though there are these times that we might fall into it, I think there's such power in declaration. It's something where I'm reminding my heart and my mind what is true. I'm reminding the devil he's lost a stronghold in my life, perhaps in that area, in my thought processes or in my habits. You know, in Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, I think it's 18:21, it says the tongue has the power of life and death. And I think it's really important that we declare this area of my life is dead. And this is what's alive. The Spirit of God is going to rule in my life. Just like me waking up this morning and kind of saying, man, that fleshly response of a bad attitude just needed to die. And I needed to partner with the Spirit of God in what He wanted to produce in my life, which was thanksgiving in that moment. And just make that declaration. Final, last one as far as review, identity axiom is this: we take a strategic step to walk with the Spirit. Take a strategic step to walk with the Spirit. The last verse here, Galatians 5:25, it says this: since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. And keep in step with the Spirit is this unique Greek word that actually has the idea of marching. It's like marching orders, like an army marching. It's very orderly. It's systematic. I think a lot of us, what we do is we want to grow in our walks with God. We want to produce the fruit of the Spirit within us, but we just do it very haphazardly, just kind of hopefully. And he says, no, we're still walking in step with the Spirit. That's very strategic. Now, you're in a small group, which means you've taken a strategic step, which is awesome. Way to go in that. But now it's even saying, okay, what can I do that's more strategic this week to walk in step with the Spirit? If you've had a garden ever in your life, or if you know someone who's a gardener, you get this, that someone who has a garden doesn't just plant the seeds and walk away, because that won't always produce what they want. You've got to water it, you got to weed it, you got to care for it, you got to tend it. And as you do that, then it will produce the fruit you want to see. Unfortunately, way too many of us say, I just want to follow God with my life, and that's as far as we take it, and then we wonder why we're not producing fruit. And that's because we're not doing these steps of caring for, tending, weeding, our spiritual journeys with the Lord. And so in your small groups this week, I would encourage you, have this conversation. What strategic step can you take in your walk with the Lord this week to set you up to produce fruit, not the flesh? Have a great conversation in your small groups, and we will see you guys next week.